Good evening to Germany and especially to Austria and all those other places where our participants live. Warm greetings from California. It's 10 a.m. in the morning here. And I hope wherever you are, you have lovely weather. I'm sure many of us would love to be visiting glorious Austria right now. I know I would. I certainly have many wonderful memories of visiting there in this winter for skiing and in the summertime for seeing the beautiful mountains. And I must say I would return in the heartbeat. But I would like to thank Mr. Palmüller, Georg, for connecting us with Mr. Ofner of Family Austria, so that all members of our partner societies of the International German Genealogy Partnership can enrich their knowledge of the information that is available for this extensive former Habsburg Empire. So I am glad that Mr. Ofner will present the rich inventory of all the data that Familia Austria has collected. And as you know, it is the goal of the IGGP to connect genealogy societies and family researchers worldwide. And sessions like this further that goal. Along those lines, therefore, please visit the International German Genealogy Partnership website to find out about the virtual conference coming in July this year. It's 2 weekends and 1 week of on-demand information and sessions and much, much more. It focuses on German genealogy, and the conference has many great speakers lined up. But for now, again, thank you very much, gentlemen, Georg and Herr Ofner, and I look forward to a very informative presentation.
Thank you, Ingeborg. And Zoom allows us to travel around the world in seconds. And I want to, now we want to travel to the wonderful city of Vienna in Austria. Good evening, Vienna. Good evening, Günther Ofner from Familia Austria.
Good evening. Well, thank you very much. We have the chance to tell you some little things about the old Austria. Mrs. Kaul, and I will do this. First, I will tell you a little introduction about the geography, the languages, the religions, the countries of Austria. And then Mrs. Kaul will tell you some examples from emigrants from Austria, some of the types. They were very different, the situations when they went away. If you have any question, don't hesitate to interrupt my speech and to ask. It's no problem for me. Better you ask immediately, so there's no misunderstanding. I don't know whether you have much information about Austria, so I will start from the beginning. This orange area was the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy in the last times from 1908 to 1918. It was the south part of Middle Europe, I can say. Here is a physical map of Austria, Hungaria. You see, it was a country with many different landscapes. There were the Alps in the west, the Carpaths around the old Hungaria, North Carpaths, East Carpaths, South Carpaths. There was the Dinaric mountain in Bosnia and in Dalmatia, but also there was the great Alpfeld, the great Hungarian plain, and in the middle of the country, there was the valley of the Danube here, which crosses the country, and because of this, It was called Donau Monarchy, monarchy of the Danube. But there also was the Theiss in Hungary, the Maros from Siebenbürgen, Transylvania. It was here the Drau and the Save in the south, and also Austria participated in the Adriatic Sea in the east side of this Adriatic Sea. So you see, it's very different, and this is the, I would say, the important for doing some research in Austria. It is very important where and when do you want to search. The conditions, especially in Lower Austria with Vienna, were different from those in Bohemia with Prague, different from those in Hungary, and so on. Each country had his own history and his own conditions. I will try to tell you about the different countries of Austria. In the northwest, it was the Kingdom of Bohemia with the capital Prague. It was a very large and important country because all the industry was concentrated there. About 2/3 of the Austrian industry before the First World War was in Bohemia. So it was the most important part of the empire. It was inhabited by Czechs and by Germans, called the Sudetendeutschen later then. The German lived in the surroundings at the borders and the Czechs in the middle of the country. Historical connected with Bohemia was Moravia, Mähren, here, this country. It was an agraric country. In the north, in the surrounding of Mährisch Ostrau, there also was some industry and mining, coal mining. In Moravia, Mähren, also lived Czechs in the middle of the country and Germans in the north and in the south. North of Moravia was Österreichisch Schlesien, Austrian Silesia. It was the rest of the large crown land of Silesia, which stayed with Austria after the Silesian Wars. The rest was occupied by Prussia. In Silesia, there were 3 different people. In the west were German, in the middle Czech, in the east Poles. East of Moravia and Silesia, there was the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria. Till 1772, this was a part of the Polish kingdom, a very large part. In the first Polish division, this kingdom came to Austria. In the west, it was inhabited by Poles, and in the east by Ukrainians, called Ruthenen in Austria. And there also was an official language in the Austrian monarchy, Ruthenisch. It was a form of Ukrainic language because the Ukrainic language today exists, at this time haven't existed. So it was specially created for these people. And in the east, there was a little country, the Bukowina, Deutsch Buchenland. It was inhabited by in the north by Ruthenen and in the south by Romanians. And there also were many Jews here. This is the same as in Galicia. About 10% of the population were Jews all over the country. There was no concentration, but concentration in the cities, but no local concentration. We will return to the west. Here's the center, the heart of the old Austria, Lower Austria, Niederösterreich auf Deutsch, with the old capital Wien, Vienna. Today, Vienna is our own country, and it is today St. Pölten, the capital of Lower Austria. But in the monarchy, it was Vienna. West of Lower Austria, there's Oberösterreich, Upper Austria, also in the valley of the Danube situated. Both countries were inhabited by Germans. In the south, there was the large crown land of Styria, Steiermark in Deutsch. It was a very a country with very large forests. About 80% of the area was and are belegt from woods. In the north and in the middle, there live Germans, in the south, Slovenians. In the west, here is Carinthia, Kärnten. Also many woods, but also some minings, different things. It was inhabited by German and in the south by Slovenian. Here is Salzburg. It came only about 100 years before the end of the monarchy to the Habsburgians. It was the youngest children of the Austrian family, and it was inhabited by Germans. The capital is also named Salzburg, and the land. And so this is one of the problems to do researches there. But because if you find a notice, he came from Salzburg, you don't know if the town Salzburg or the country Salzburg. And in the west, there was the large country of Tyrol. The north belongs to Austria and the south to Italy. In the north, there live Germans, and in the south, in the region of Trento, Italians, and in the east, there are the Ladin valleys. And the country which was in the extreme west is Vorarlberg. It is between the Bodensee and the Tyrolic border. There live Germans. South of Carinthia, there is Carniola, die Krain. That is a Slavic word and means the border. It's the same as Ukraina. Ukraina also means border, because this Krain, this Herzogtum Krain, was the border of the Holy Roman Empire. Here, this was a Holy Roman Empire, and at the other side of the border, there was the Kingdom of Croatia. And here in the south, there were the so-called Küstenlande, coastlands. It was Istria, the country of Görz and Gradiska, and the city of Trieste, the free city. And in the south, there was the Kingdom of Dalmatia. It came in 70 1899 to Austria from the Republic of Venetia. These countries were the Austrian half of the monarchy. In Ukraine, there mostly live Slovenes, in the coastlands, Italians, Slovenes, Croats. It's quite mixed, and in Dalmatia, there were mostly Croats, a small minority of Italians. So we will come to the Hungarian half of the monarchy. This is this area here. It was divided only in 3 parts. Hungaria itself, and south of the Drau, the river Drau here, the Kingdom of Croatia, which belongs since the Middle Age to the Kingdom of Hungaria. But it had autonomous status. And then the harbor city of Fiume in Croatia, Rijeka called, also was an autonomous part of the Hungarian kingdom. In former times, there were more partitions, especially here Transylvania, and in the south, the Banat here. But in the final 50 years of the monarchy, those autonomous parts were taken directly to Hungary. Hungary in the last centuries was a centralistic state, and Austria was a very federalistic state. You can see it in the lot of countries which belong to Austria. So this is a short introduction. Only 10 years in the south, Bosnia and Herzegovina belongs to the monarchy. It came from the Osmanic Reich, the Turks, to Austria. And here in the capital, Sarajevo, the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were shot, and this was the starting of the First World War. Here you can see a historic map of the Habsburgian, the Donau monarchy, Habsburg monarchy, as you will call. And you can see also many other countries belonged to the monarchy. Some only 5 or 10 years, but some other at a very long time. So especially the Lombardy, it belongs 150 years to Austria. Milan, Mailand is the capital. Also about 100 years, the Netherlands, the today states of Belgium and Luxembourg belonged to Austria. So Mrs. Kaul, who lives in Brussels, is sitting in an old Austrian crownland. And you can see all the other countries who belong to the monarchy. Here in the south of Germany today, it was called Vorderösterreich, Austria anterior. Here the historical territories in the Swiss, and here in Italy, here on the Balkan, Silesia, additional parts of Poland. So you always have to think in that time you are researching which territories belong to Austria, belong to the Habsburgians, because it has changed very often. This is a very complicated and interesting fact. Here is a ethnical and language card, we call. It's from Karl Freiherr von Zörnig, eine ethnographische Karte, Sie sehen es hier. It means here is marked which language was used where. Here the red is German, here is Czech, Slovak, here is Polish, Ruthenic, Romanic, the white is Hungarian, also in Transylvania in a part. And here is Slovenic, here is Italic. At this time, this map was produced, 1855, you can see it here. The Lombardy and Venetia have belonged to the monarchy, but Bosnia hasn't belonged. This was later. In the south, there were Croats.
May I just ask, on this map that you're showing, are there railway lines?
No. At this time, railways started. There were not many railways in 1855. But of course, we have also railway maps. If you are interested in, I can send you.
Yes, I would be. So the lines are roads, presumably.
The lines here are roads and rivers. This is the Theiss. This is the Danube. And also borders, of course. Here's the Plattensee, the Balaton. But at 1855, there, yes, here is, you see, a first railway. But in the following 40 years, there were built a lot of railways in Austria-Hungary. It is not, it's a map about the languages, not about railways. There were special maps for. If you send me your email address, I will send you the link or the map of the railways itself.
Thank you.
Perhaps put your address in the chat so I can see. Good. This was, you can see there were 11 main languages in Austria-Hungary and many little others, which I can't introduce because there's no time for it. It is important for the researching because also the church books are written in different languages. You will find German matrix, Czech matrix, Hungarian, of course, Latin. You will find in the south Italian matrix, of course. You will find Slovenic matrix and Polish, of course. So it's very good to have knowledges of some main languages which are used in this area you want to research. Especially Latin is very important, and of course German. So I can advise you to learn these languages if you want to do researching here. Here a map of the writings. The blue color here is the Deutsche Schrift, Kurrent genannt in German. It was a special form of the handwriting and also in the printed types. It was used in the German inhabited areas in the today Austria, but also in Bohemia, Moravia, and in the many isles in the rest of the monarchy. This pink area is the Latin writing. It was used by the Hungarians, mostly by the Czech and the Croats. In the east, you see the green color. It's the Cyrillic writing. It was used partly in Galicia or also in the Bukovina And till the 19th century, also Romanian was written in Cyrillic types. So all the Romans, which were about 4 or 5 million people in the monarchy, used the Cyrillic writing till about 1872. And in the south, there was also the Arabic. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Arabic script writing, as it was a part of the old Osmanic Empire. So you have also, not only in the languages, but also in the writing, very much different possibilities. Here is a map of the main religions in the monarchy. Red is a Roman Catholic. Yellow is Evangelic, both Reformed and Lutheric. Green here is Greek Catholic. They were united with the Holy Seat in Rome, but used the Eastern ritus. And here in the south, this blue area, and here in the east, there mostly lived Greek Orthodox people, the Serbs, most of the Romanians were followers of this confession. In the south, there also was Islam in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and all over the country, especially where these points here are, there were many Jews, especially in the east of Galicia, in the Bukovina, and in the northeast of Hungaria here, but also in the main cities as Budapest, as Wien, as Prague. They were very old Jewish communities. But it isn't so simple. You see, also in Bohemia, in Moravia, and in the Alps, there were small isles of evangelic people. So you have to recognize this, because the religion organizations, the churches and the Jewish Kultusgemeinden did the matrix. There were no matrix by the state, by the country. All this laid at the religions. In Hungaria, the old Hungaria, the whole kingdom, from 1895 on, there were also Standesämter, state offices for registration. In the western part, the old Austria, they were in the monarchy never. They came in the middle of the 20th century. An important point, if you are researching in the old Austria, you always have to tell which religion it belongs, because only this, without this information, it will be quite impossible to find something, because there were different sources for it. Here you can see some banknotes from the monarchy, the last banknotes which were printed before the First World War. You see here 20 kronen, 20 crowns, and you see the these are the languages of the other. This is where the other languages of the monarchy here. So each people can read it in his own language. And on the other side, there was a whole in Hungarian.
Sorry to interrupt again.
Please.
You speak of languages. The administration of the empire, was that done solely in German, or once the dual monarchy came, was it German and Hungarian, or how was the actual administration done?
Look, a unique empire only existed from 1804 to 1867. Before this, every country had its own laws, its own Landtag, its own parliament, and especially rules. Only the king or the duke or the count was the same person, the Habsburg Kaiser in Wien. So before 1804, there was no Austrian Empire, but a lot of Habsburgian countries, which belong together and have some common institutions. So in each country, there were different administration languages. In Bohemia and in Moravia, always German and Czech were the official languages. In Styria, this was German and Slovenic. So it was in Carinthia. And in Tyrol, there was German and Italic. So you can't say there was a own language. It doesn't exist. From 1804 to 1867, there was the Kaisertum Österreich. This was a quite centralistic state. And in the beginning, there hasn't changed very much because it was impossible to say now it's this language to use because the people wouldn't have understand and also the people in the offices wouldn't understand. In 1848, in the revolution year, there was established a parliament and a constitution, a first constitution, but there have only participated the Western countries. Hungaria and the Italic countries haven't participated because they don't want. Here it was written, and in every following constitution, that in the Austrian part of the empire, there were 8 official languages. It was German, Czech, Polish, Ruthenisch, Rumänisch, Italian, Slovenish, and Croatish. So all the laws and the official messages were published in every of these 8 languages. So there were 8 official languages. In the east part, in Hungary, and there was a long time Latin, the official language, and from 1842 to 1849, the revolution year, it was Hungarian. Then it was for some years German, and from 1861 to the end of the monarchy, it was Hungarian. In the Kingdom of Croatia, it always was Croatic. And in Bosnia-Herzegovina, there is not much different between the Croatic, the Serbic, and the Bosnian language, so there was not such a problem. So you see, there wasn't a unique official language. Is this what you wanted to know?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. That clarifies it all. I mean, it must have been problematic at the start, or for the military, to have all these different languages and giving sort of orders to military commanders and everything in different languages. Perhaps that was one of the reasons why
yes, it was a problem.
The Austrian war effort wasn't quite as good as it might have been.
Yes, it was a great problem, of course. But there was not one army in the old Austria. There were 4 armies at the same time. There was a common army, the K und K army, which was for the whole country, the East and the West, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. There, the commando language was German, but the Regimentssprachen, the languages of the regiments, were in which the education was done. It was the there was following modus. Each language which was understood from at least 20% of the soldiers was an official regiment's language. So most of the regiments of the common army had 2, 3, or 4 official languages in which the education was done. And only the commando language in which the commandos were given was German, but this was only 90 words. So the recruits have not to learn German, but only to learn these 90 words. And the education was done in their home language. In the practice, in the First World War, this was a great problem because not all officers had spoken all the languages in the monarchy. And often they could not talk to their soldiers because they haven't found a common language. It was a problem, of course. Good. I have one point which is very important. You would have heard about the Austrian emperors. Here is a painting of Maria Theresia and her husband, Franz Stephan, emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and some of their children. Here's the son, Joseph II, the follower as emperor. They were quite absolutic times, but also in this time, there was the Ständiger Reichstag in Regensburg, Ratisbonia in Latin. So also Franz Stephan couldn't do as he liked. He had to adhere to the things which were decided here. Only in the Habsburg territory, this Reichstag was not very powerful. And as it was in the last centuries of the monarchy. Here's the Emperor Franz Joseph, who ruled 68 years, but from 1867 to the end of the monarchy, there were parliaments here in Vienna and here in Budapest. So the laws were taken from the parliaments. This was no absolute ruling. It was a democracy with a very powerful emperor, of course, but especially the parliament in Budapest don't hear to Franz Joseph. They did what they want. So it was not the absolute time. It was almost democratic. Perhaps not as democratic as today, but quite democratic, I would say. So the members of this parliament were elected by the people. In the Austrian part from 1907 on, all the men have the right to vote. All the men, the equal right to vote. Because it is a cliche that in Austria the emperors dominated in the last 50 years. This wasn't right. So, and here I will stop because Mrs. Kaul also wants to tell you interesting things. If you have questions, you can do them later if you want. Thank you very much.
Hi, hi. I hope you can all see and hear me. My name is Christina. I'm actually an Austrian by origin, but I've been living abroad for the last 20 years. So I'm, as Günther said, I'm actually living in Brussels. So working on EU affairs. So that's why I'm here. A bit to summarize what Günther said, I think you all grasp by now that one of the big challenges actually is the diversity of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. It is just, you can't, if you think okay, my family came from Austria, somewhere in Austria, and therefore I can have the same approach to doing my research, that won't work. And of course, one of the challenges is that it was an empire at the time, but now it's not. And now it has been replaced by, I don't know, roughly 20 countries. And each of these countries is organizing access to its documents and to its sources in a different way. So whereas in the times of the monarchy, people migrated heavily and constantly between the different regions and the different parts of the empire, now we're kind of stuck in the countries that succeeded the old empire, which simply means for research purposes it has become very complex. Because of course, if your family comes from, let's just take Upper Austria, and of course, then you have certain research possibilities. But at the time, people were moving over to Bohemia and to Moravia, and that was kind of very local movements because it was, I don't know, 50, 100 kilometers from where they lived. But today, you are in totally different archives, in a totally different system. So it becomes rather complex, actually, if you in particular have families which have been migrating between the different parts of the empire. The other thing is, as Günther explained, that it was rather regionally decentralized approach to government affairs, which means that every state organized itself in a different way. So even the type of documents which you now find as sources is quite different. There are some parts of the monarchy which did census, so you can find a census in some parts in Bohemia and in some other parts, but then there are parts of the empire which never did a census, or which only did a census in the 16th and 17th century. So we're lucky and have type of census, very, very old ones, but you don't have new ones from the same area. So each region has a very divergent kind of access also to documents and availability of documents, what you can find. So as Günther pointed out, nothing really on documentation at the time has been done by government documents or centralized administration documents, but it's all via either religion. And for a long time, it was the dominant Catholic religion in the areas where the Catholics were dominant that were the ones who had to do all the records, even for the religious minorities. So in some areas, when your family was from a Protestant minority, you won't find a church book, a Protestant church book. No, you actually have to go to the Catholic church book because it was the Catholic parish priest who was responsible for doing the records for the Protestant minority. Then you have in other areas, for example, in what today which was at the originally the border region between the empire and the Balkans, so down in Serbia, what is today Serbia or southern Croatia, they had such a big mix of religions that the Catholic parish priest who was responsible for recording all these different religious minorities decided to have a special church book for the religious minorities. So there was a parallel church book, but which was actually kept by the Catholic parish in order to register all the other ones, because you had the Greek Orthodox and the Greek Catholic, and you had Protestants, and you name it. But they all still were kept in a Catholic church book. So it's quite diverse. And in the end, you really need to get a bit deeper into the region where you want to do your research to figure out what is available, what archives, etc. In general, I would say digitalization of the records is pretty good all over the empire. There's some spots where it is still difficult to do online research, but in a lot of the regions and former countries belong to the empire, we have a very, very high degree of digitalization. And contrary to Germany, most of our digitalized records are for free. They're simply online. You just need to know where to find them. You don't pay for them. So it's not like the poor Germans, as we always say, who where things are require more money. It's differently organized. Most of these records are on public platforms where they got digitalized by the today national administration. So that is I don't know if any of you, for example, are interested in what we consider religious minorities, in Protestants or in Jewish, because all that is quite a specialized type of research, which, I mean, I don't think we will get into too much detail today. We have a really wonderful resource on Familia Austria. If you go to our website, you have hundreds and links of telling you if you want to do internet research on a specific region, where you find the records, what type of records are available, which archives are digitalized. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to find, but you spend some time there, but you really find very interesting sources which you can access online. So that was kind of to finish off what Günther was talking about. The monarchy is a lot about migration, a lot of internal migration between the regions. But of course, there was also a lot of emigration into other areas. And I know a lot of you are interested in emigration into the US. And I wanted to give you kind of a couple of examples of what type of emigration has taken place from the old empire towards the US. Just to show you that it is, again, a huge diversity. The reasons for doing so was extremely diverse again. And the first kind of group which we know quite well about, one of the groups about immigration are actually the region I'm coming from. I was growing up, which is this famous western part of the Austrian Empire and the Lake of Constance region. We there have a very old Jewish community in Hohenems. And that community goes back to the Middle Age. It was at a time where that part didn't belong actually to the Habsburg yet. And the local count had a very liberal policy towards Jews. So it's a very, very old Jewish community, which for a long time kept the records, not just for its community, but for the whole of the Western Austria, including Southern Tyrol going as east as to Salzburg. So all the Jewish records west of Salzburg were kept by that community in the far west. They were wealthy Jews. It was a wealthy community, a lot of tradespeople, a lot of trade happening between the Lake of Constance region and the south in Italy, towards northern Germany. And they very early on got interested in trading with the US and trading with the UK. So already in 1750, we had from this community people traveling to the US, a lot of times really for business travel, which is quite kind of unbelievable in the 18th century that you did business travel to the US, but they did. And what is very interesting, some of them, of course, settled down mostly on the East Coast. But we looked at the records of that Jewish community, and what was interesting is they came home a bit like, we blame some minorities for today in order to get married. So we have quite a number of American Jews around 1800 with addresses in Baltimore and Philadelphia coming over to that small community in order to marry and take their brides over to the US, where they actually then settled in. The same goes for the Jewish communities in the UK. They also had some of these who came back for getting married in that Jewish community in the western part of the empire. So that's one example. The other one is we did some months ago, actually a year or 18 months ago, some research about a watchmaker, a Viennese watchmaker, who suddenly around 1850 disappeared. No one could find him anymore. His wife remarried, and we found that we really had troubles in deciphering the record of the second wedding. And after a while, we figured out that it said that the guy, her first husband, the watchmaker, had died in New York. And we said, how the hell did the guy in 85 suddenly come over to New York? So we figured out that he was actually clandestinely involved in the revolution of 1848. He had contacts with the German revolutionaries, and because the revolution failed to some extent, the Germans did a big effort to get German revolutionaries over to the US. So we found Freemason lodges in the US specialized on German revolutionaries. Some of them were coming back after a couple, or some were traveling in between, and a lot of them settled down and became somewhat of some of the, I don't know, the intelligentsia in New York. So political motives, obviously, for immigration. And again, not totally permanent, but people moving back and forth. The other example is we recently got contacted by an American family who had been struggling to find where their families were coming from. And I think a lot of Americans are facing that problem. The first source they have is the US Census, which of course is extremely inaccurate. It just says everyone is German. Doesn't matter, German speaking means German. So that often doesn't give a hint where people were really coming from. So we managed, after some research, to find where the family were coming from. They were coming from Bohemia, and they had immigrated in 1850 to the US. And there it was not a poor family. It was I would say it was not a super wealthy family, but they were well off. The father owned a medium-sized farm. His brother was running an inn in eastern Bohemia, so they had some money. And they decided that from their 4 sons, one would take over the farm, and he actually paid out the other 3, his 3 brothers, so that they could together emigrate to the US. So the 3 brothers took their families, went from Liberec in Reichenberg in eastern Bohemia, northeastern Bohemia, to Liverpool, took a boat there, and all of them went over to the US. So it was economic reasons, but not kind of poverty in that sense, but more like with limited possibilities at home, and why not try something different in the US. And if you look into the totally different pattern is, and after that, end of 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, where we had really a mass exodus from the East over to the US, from Galicia, from Eastern Poland, from Russia. And these were really the poor masses, people who had nothing, who sold everything they had just in order to pay for a ticket on one of the boats. Normally ripped off by the people who organized their migration and who arrived in the US without anything, without a penny, and were trying to somehow find work there and settle in. on that last one, I wanted to recommend you a book, and I'm going to write that into your paper, which unfortunately only exists in German, and not only in German, but it's a guy, and the title is The American Emperor, because people in Galicia, they couldn't imagine what a democracy is. So for them, every country had an emperor. So the shipping companies told them that there was an emperor in the US and he would wait for them. So that's why the title of the book is called The American Emperor. And it's about the people who went from Galicia to the US. I can really recommend it because it's someone he wrote the book on the basis of sources which we would use for family research. So a lot on church books, a lot on records by the police who caught people who had no money and things like that, sources like that. So it's very well researched, and it gives you a lot of insight into how immigration was organized and how it was working at a time. There's also, it's got translated into Polish and French, that is of any use, unfortunately not into English. And the story is the same if it's Galicia or Eastern Poland or Russia. And the interesting thing there is that the perception is that most of these people would immigrate permanently, but that actually wasn't the case. About half of them went back and forth between Galicia and the US. They came back, they actually wanted, it was labor migration a lot of times in the first place, where they went over in order to work for a couple of years. Then they came back because they were dreaming of buying some land where they were coming from. Then they discovered that it didn't work that easily, that times had changed, that they needed more money. So they went back to the US for a second time or for a third time. Some of them didn't come back. Some of them took finally their families with them. I myself have in my family a case of someone who lived from today's Ukraine, and where the father went 3 times to Chicago for working in a car factory until he finally came back in 1912. And then he stayed in Eastern Poland, today's Ukraine. So he was someone who had no education, no nothing, but nevertheless, he had traveled 3 times to Chicago for working in a factory there. So things which are quite surprising today. I mean, Familia Austria is we're not specialized on people looking for, people who have emigrated and who are looking for their roots. Huh? But there are a couple of things which I think are important to look at. First of all, it is the story about that for a lot of the Americans looking for their roots, it's the US Census, which is the point of departure. And a lot of the younger census are, false or simplified because they label everyone who is German speaking as German. So therefore, very often people believe their families were coming from Germany, but actually they weren't. They were coming from Moravia or from Bohemia or even from Bukovina, but they were German speaking. So our experience is that it's the oldest US census records which are the best, because they're the ones which often still state someone is from Austria or from Bohemia. And obviously you can easily say someone is German although he was Austrian, but you wouldn't put someone in the census as Bohemian if he's not, most of the times. So therefore, if somewhere it turns up Bohemian, that's very helpful. Then we know where actually to start work. The other thing is that because the empire was so huge, the routes of emigration differed enormously. There wasn't one route on how to immigrate to the US. Of course, a lot of the Galician people from Galicia, from Eastern Poland, from northern Bohemia, would travel to the US via Hamburg and Bremen, so via northern Germany, and they would take the boat there. So therefore, that is a very important point of looking into databases and looking who has been on the boats in order to trace people back to where they were coming from. But of course, in other parts of the old Austrian-Hungarian Empire, no one went up to the north of Germany, but they went, be it from Trieste, from Italy, or some from the western parts might even have gone via France to the US. So again, as diverse as the empire was, as diverse the immigration routes were. The one case that we were looking into for this family who was searching for the family, which finally we discovered in northeastern Bohemia, is if you went through if you left from a port which didn't understand any German, a lot of the names got totally misspelled on the ship records. I mean, the family we were looking at, they actually had left via Liverpool. So the people in Liverpool who did the records had no idea of German last names, and it totally fucked up really the first names. The first names were unrecognizable. I had thought these must be, you know, they were not German speaking at all, because obviously this guy in Liverpool had never heard these German first names before. So that makes it, of course, very, very difficult. I've seen the same with people who emigrated via Cherbourg or in France, where again, the French couldn't figure out German-speaking names. And if you rely on these records, it's really, really hard to trace people back. So if you manage to get the region, at least to know which region they were coming from, and you get kind of the last names right, there has been enormous progress in the last 20 years on the chances of finding someone, of defining where he was coming from, even if you have little records. The reason is that nowadays we have so many databases where we have put so many records in that, and we tried that out with the family. When you put in the family name, you can define the regions where this family name is pretty dominant. So of course, if you have a name like Müller or Schneider or Schmidt, which kind of, you know, there are millions of those. But if you have anything which is a bit more particular, you can at least define a couple of regions where you know there has been a high density of that name. And then you can start working on these regions. And although it still is a lot of work, it is much easier to get anywhere than it was 20 years ago when you didn't have these tools. Yeah, I think that's about where I wanted to stop and take questions on whatever you're interested to talk about.